On imom.com, we share ideas, insight, and inspiration. We do all that here too by sharing the best kind of stories, mom stories. We're all at different ages and stages, but one thing we have in common is that we're striving, and sometimes struggling, to love our children well. It's the iMom Podcast. Welcome to this week's episode of the iMom Podcast. I'm Abby, and I'm joined by Susan, Chloe, and this week's storyteller, Megan. When it comes to disciplining kids, no method works or fails 100% of the time. So we called this week's story, The Discipline Du Jour. Have you guys seen Dumb and Dumber?
Yes.
So, you know, when he's
but I don't want to admit to it.
He's in the diner and he said, "What's the soup du jour?" And she says, "It's the soup of the day." So that sounds good. I'll have that. So it's the discipline of the day. Hopefully by the end of our chat today, we're all going to have a better insight into what makes some discipline techniques a good fit or bad fit for each individual child. So Megan, what's your story?
Yeah, so I live up north in the DC area, and it is January here right now. And so we have had a few snow days and they canceled school. And so my friend and I wanted to get our 2.5, 3-year-old out just so they could at least play inside somewhere together and just get them out for a little interaction, just out of the house. So we took them to lunch. Lunch went great. They played together really well. They always play together for the most part very well. Toward the end of the lunch, though, they both started fighting over a toy and both just had mega meltdowns, screaming, crying, fighting with each other. And so fortunately, we're pretty much done with our lunch and escorted them out of the restaurant into the hallway. And we were trying to get them both to calm down a little bit because they were just like on the floor crying, saying they wanted each other's toy. And we could not get them to calm down. They were both just losing it. And it was embarrassing. I've never seen my child melt down like that. I mean, he's thrown a couple little tantrums here and there, but he was like hyperventilating. So it led to a later discussion at a later date. She and I were talking about, they're getting to the age now where discipline is kind of coming into the picture because they can understand more. They're getting a little bit older. They're almost 3. And I was just saying how I, never wanted to spank my kids. I thought, okay, we will do the 1, 2, 3 timeout or some other creative way to discipline them. I don't want to spank my kids. Well, James is a very strong-willed, stubborn child. And my husband and I have tried a number of different methods of disciplining him. And sometimes he responds, but a lot of the times he doesn't. And so we have occasionally spanked him, and it seems to be effective because he didn't enjoy it and he learned and he didn't do it again. But it still kind of kills me because I don't really want to have to get to that level. Now, there are times when, because he's a toddler and he's so young, like, for example, at the restaurant, when he was having a meltdown, I just kind of escorted him out and put him in the car and we both went home. But it led to this discussion with my friend because I was telling her about kind of the different disciplining tactics that we've tried. She was like, I could tell by her face that she was kind of shocked and appalled that
it's a hard discussion,
that I spanked James. And I said, I don't blame you. Like, I never wanted to spank my kids, but he is very strong-willed, and it's just gotten to that point where like we've tried everything else. And she was asking me like, have you tried this book and this book? And I was like, yes, we've, and so for certain offenses, he gets spanked. And I think she still is kind of like, I will never do that. But, she was discussing the methods that they have done with their son, and he has just been much more agreeable to those tactics of discipline. And so I think to me, I'm kind of never thought I'd be that parent, but I'm kind of seeing that different kids respond to different forms of discipline. And hopefully my next child will be a little bit more malleable. But that was just something that as we're entering this kind of next phase with our kids, talking about different forms of discipline, I'm always curious to hear what different people do.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that different moms use different methods with each child because like you said, every kid responds to things differently. And this is definitely not going to be an episode about whether to spank or not because there's so much so much research and psychology and thought behind that and opinions. So it's a touchy one. I think that discipline has changed so much over time too. Like when I remember when I was a kid, and Susan, I don't know if you could remember to when your kids were little, but timeout wasn't a thing. Like I don't remember ever being told by my parents, you're going into timeout. Like that was a phrase that kind of has come along in maybe the past 20 years or so. I don't
No, we used it with our kids for sure. So it was around then. I think it's so interesting. There's so much management training out there about managing different personalities. And I wish somebody would do it for children because as a mom, that's exactly what you're doing. Like you said, you're managing different personalities and trying to coach them into certain behaviors. And they're all going to be different. And therefore your coaching has to be different. But at the same time, when you set expectations for your family, you don't want it to be unfair. Like you want the kids to all have the same expectations. So there is this tension there between managing them differently, but still having the same standard of behavior that you have to coach them towards.
Right.
And I think as a family, you have to come up with some basic rules and basic strategies that apply to all those kids. And then in the nuances of each child, know what's going to motivate them to change their behaviors. There's this consequence side of, okay, you did the wrong thing and we have to talk about this. And then there's this motivation side of, how can I help you learn to not do that again? And in this case, he's so little that, remove and reflect is really all you can do, is get him out of it because they're going to escalate. They want that toy. One's pitching a fit. The other's going to pitch a fit. It's now a testosterone. Who's going to pitch the biggest fit? And I'm not going to be out screamed.
It's like you have to be a student of your child for so long. And then finally, I think once you pass the test or graduate, they're gone. It's like I finally learned and now we're done.
Exactly.
But I also think you bring into it how you were raised and what was done with you as a child. And so Susan being Megan's mother, Megan, do you have the same memory of discipline as Susan does?
I think this is just from my opinion. I think I was a much more obedient child than maybe my current child is. Susan, you can weigh in on that. I remember getting spanked a couple times, but it was like for very serious offenses and I never did it again because I did not.
People listening right now are like, well, she calls her mom by her first name.
Yeah.
So maybe she needs some discipline for that.
She should have been spanked. That's because we worked together. We had to eliminate the mom.
Yeah. And with James, he's really only been spanked when it's like a serious danger issue we told him not to do it and he continued to do it anyways willfully after we told him not to do it. And it's something that he could get hurt or end up in the hospital that we're like, okay, you cannot do that. You absolutely cannot jump on the glass coffee table. Like, no.
Yeah.
And so that's really kind of for major offenses where he is just being a boy and wants to jump off the couch into the glass coffee table. You can't do that.
Megan is right though. She had a good self-control. And she had good cognitive understanding. So if I spoke to her about stuff, she would understand the why behind. And that's the thing with any kind of correction for your children. As they age up, you want them to understand the why we don't do that, because then they will self-regulate. If they just always hear no and everything's a no, then they're going to start, playing Russian roulette. Well, maybe I should take a chance on that no. But if but she had siblings who were not her.
We actually have a great article about the power of why on iMom. And basically the power of why is that when you ask your child to do something or tell your child to do something, you also include because provides context for them. It helps them look outside of their own need. And I thought the example was so good that our writer, I think it's Nancy that wrote this article. Yeah. Nancy Juergens, who wrote it. She said a study was done where they asked people, okay, I'm going to cut in line in front of you at the copy machine. And they asked people this in 3 different ways. And the first one was, excuse me, I have 5 pages. May I use the Xerox machine? Does anybody call it the Xerox machine anymore? I need to make dittos. Can I get in line in front of you? Excuse me, I have 5 pages. May I use the Xerox machine? Second option, excuse me, I have 5 pages. May I use the Xerox machine because I have to make copies? Well, no, duh. Yeah. Excuse me, I have 5 pages. May I use the Xerox machine because I'm in a rush? The 2 requests with because got 90%, more than 90% compliance, while the one without because got 60%. And so the same concept applies for kids when you give them a because I need you to get your shoes on because we have to get out of the house on time because I have a meeting this morning. It just is that extra little bit of data for them to step outside of their own desires at that moment.
And there's a great story I have about that sometimes you do let them win. So there was this one time we were going to the zoo and I knew there'd be a lot of walking, but my daughter wanted to wear her sparkly shoes to the zoo. And I said, no, you cannot wear your sparkly shoes because we're going to be on our feet walking a long time.
Dangerous wild animals, they might be distracted by the sparkles.
No, I said you might get blisters and it's just good. You're going to feel so much better if you wear pitch to fit. Wear the sparkly shoes. I let her. I said, okay, but you cannot complain. You cannot fall behind because it was a school thing. I was chaperoning. And she wore them and there was pain. And she learned the lesson. Do not wear your sparkly shoes to Disney, to the zoo, or to anywhere where you're going to, and so sometimes you do let it be a natural consequence. And then they do learn the why and they do store that memory away. So it takes creativity. The problem with consequences and disciplining and training our children is it takes time and thought, and we're just so busy. It's hard.
Yep.
And it takes consistency.
So Chloe, you're the youngest one in the room. What discipline technique was used on you?
Well, lots of different ones. I would say my mom was a very creative disciplinarian.
Sure. Yeah.
But one story does come to mind because my middle brother and I are 2 years apart. So when we were younger, we had a lot of the same friends. We hung out together a lot. And we had gotten into like a pretty big fight. And we were just saying really mean things to each other. So my mom was like, okay, well, since you guys can't use, kind words, you can't say nice things, she made us both drink a spoonful of vinegar. And I remember just drinking it and being like, this is the worst thing ever. And my middle brother, who is like defiant, was like, I like it. Give me another spoonful. Just like did not work on him. But that story always stands out in my mind because it did work on my personality, but not his. Because he's very much that personality of like, if you think I won't like this, I'm going to like it. Like he has that kind of like drive.
Contrarian.
Yeah, contrarian. Yeah. So I think it was interesting because we would get in trouble together a lot because we were so close. And he is an introvert. So if my mom sent us both to our room, I'm having like the worst time in there because I want to I'm an extrovert. I want to go hang out with people. My brother's like, all right, see ya. Like, I'm going to be in my room. Don't bother me, So I think, that was always interesting to see the difference in like how she disciplined me versus my other brothers.
Yeah. I don't remember, I think I got spanked a couple times, but I don't remember any specific technique because I was kind of afraid of my mom. Like she had a really stern look that she would give me. And I just knew.
Did you get into trouble a lot as a kid?
Just regular kid stuff. My sister and I would fight or, stuff like that. I wasn't
a troublemaker.
Someone under
the table.
I kicked someone.
We remember that story from another podcast.
That episode, Sticks and Stones. So I don't remember getting in trouble that much, but my parents were really strict. My mom was really strict. And so even as a pretty good kid, I remember a lot of that face, and I think I do the same thing with my kids. I think
that's a great power, though. Just the face does it. Wow.
I think if I had a mirror in front of me, I might second guess it though, because I think it can get pretty scary, But my mom did one time. I don't know. I guess this would be discipline as for an older kid. If my room was not picked up, if she had told me a number of times to pick up my room, she would take my clothes and put them on the front lawn.
Whoa.
And one day I came out and there, one of my bras was in a bush.
How old were you?
I was in high school.
Oh, that's just.
Yeah.
We have that great tool, the clutter jail. That's what the clutter jail is. You pick it up and you put it in jail and they got to do something to get it out.
Well, is jail out in the front yard where neighbors can see?
That's humiliating. That works for a teenager.
It did. That time that she did it, she had done it to my sister and that didn't teach me the lesson. But when I had it done to myself.
Yeah. Well, especially in Florida, they could be very dewy by the next
that's
day.
exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Yuck.
Yep. But there are I did some research in writing an article about discipline techniques and why they might not work. And I think it's important to remember that a friend might say, timeout does not work. And you can go, well, maybe for you it doesn't work, but it does work for my kid. And so it really does. It's not one size fits all. But speaking of timeout, for some parents, for some children, when you send your child to timeout, their brain will experience a surge of stress-related hormones because when they're separated from the parent, that's biologically not what a child wants, right? So they get this surge of stress, which prompts more acting out. And then mom or dad respond with more separation, and it circles around and around. One expert called this a discipline vortex. And so if you can imagine, you just start circling the drain of disobedience and fighting because he's not getting what he wants. You're not getting what you want, back and forth. There's no like moment of peace. And so for a lot of kids, that type of discipline, like a timeout or separating from the parent, that's why it doesn't work.
I had one like that. My son, who we adopted when he was 9, was really rough, and he had grown up in the wilderness of Russia, so that explains that. But
I mean, isn't that everybody's story?
yeah,
Like when you say that, some people listen are like, "Excuse me."
No, he did.
That'll be a story for another day.
But I would put him in timeout, and he would go into this just zone. And I didn't realize until several months later that he would go to that fear side of his brain and start thinking about Russia and what happened to him there. And it didn't work with him. I couldn't do it because it sent him somewhere. It was bad. It was like a trigger.
So how do you know the difference between a kid who has like a serious trigger like that and a kid who just is acting out?
So, I was looking because we have this on iMom, the 3 R's of discipline: remove, reflect, and reconnect. And we actually have a printable for it too, where you can, if the child, it's called Think About It. If the child it does something wrong, it's like the second or third time, and they can write minimally or at least express themselves. You send them with this printable and you say, okay, look, you know what you just did was wrong. I want you to go think about it. And that's why it's called, the printable is called Think About It. Tell me what you did wrong. Tell me how we've been through. Tell me what you did wrong. Tell me what you could have done differently. And then in the 3 R's, of course, you've removed them from the situation, like if they're fighting with their siblings in your case, and then they reflect using this little printable, and then you reconnect with them. And that's the important part, is the reconnection. Okay, I see you struggling with this. This is the 3rd time you've done this. How can I help you? Because I've given a couple of consequences and they're not working. So is this, and creative consequences, that printable too has this too. Is this an impulsive? Are they just impulsive? Like you've told them not to run with the scissors, but they keep running with the scissors. Or is it, kind of emotionally driven, like they're frustrated or angry or something like that? Or is it willful disobedience? Do they know they're doing it wrong and it's calculated and they're going to do it again because they want to do it? These are all like different levels of severity. And you got to kind of address them. The first time a child does something impulsively, like this tantrum that James had, you're almost kind of like, he's tired, he's young, he was jealous, he doesn't know what to do with his jealousy. We just need to take a break and, till he gets a little older. But if it's a 6-year-old having this kind of tantrum, then of course they should know better. You got to start training out that behavior because you don't want them having meltdowns in kindergarten. That's just humiliating for them. They're going to be ostracized as a child. I also had an adopted child who was 12 that we adopted when she was almost 13. And she had tantrums, like flat out meltdown tantrums. And the counselor said to me, this is not appropriate for her age. It's going to affect her social standing amongst her peers because in this culture, that's inappropriate. Yeah. And he said, you need to let her have it. Grab yourself, whatever you drink, Diet Coke, iced tea, sit down and watch her. And sure enough, I did. And she stood up and stomped her little foot and got so mad. She goes, what's wrong with you?
Oh, nice.
Because it didn't work. It was a thing for her. It got her results before. And she had to learn, you don't get results when you have this kind of behavior. That's just a whole nother story. But
well, and there's the 2 different kind of tantrums that I learned about were the downstairs tantrum and the upstairs tantrum. So the downstairs is using that primitive part of your brain when that primitive part of your brain takes over, which is like the part of your brain that works with basic functions like breathing, blinking, fear, anger, fight or flight. And when our kids are under stress or so overcome with emotion, it can take over and it doesn't allow them to go upstairs and use that logical part of their brain that says, it's okay if I don't have a popsicle right now. It's not the end of the world. Like all of a sudden, all those things have taken over and they can't rationalize anymore. That downstairs tantrum, it's like sometimes you just have to walk away and let them have their moment.
That's a great explanation. And that was definitely James. He was down. He was
right. But then the upstairs, you can kind of think of it like they're being a little bit more manipulative. Like they know what they're doing. And for that one, you might actually have to walk away too,
sit there and watch so that they see it's ineffective.
Yep. Well, Megan, you mentioned the counting to 3. How's that working out for you?
So he definitely responds to it more now. After he got spanked once after we counted to 3 and he didn't stop. So it's funny because I get to 3 and whatever he's doing, he kind of lingers and waits to see if I'm going to do anything. And then if I like start walking toward him, he like backs off immediately.
So let me ask you, when you say, I'm going to count to 3, do you have a plan for what's going to happen if you get to 3 and he still refuses?
Depending on the offense, like I said earlier, if it's something minor, it's either timeout, which he doesn't like, or it's not playing with the toy, or it's leaving wherever we are. If he's playing with a friend, he's very social for a 2.5-year-old. So if I say we're going to go home, he doesn't like that. But if it's something serious, I don't even count to 3. I just take him, have him stop doing whatever it is, running into traffic, whatever it might be, and like grab him. And then if he knows he's not supposed to do it, like if it's something he's done before and he knows he's not supposed to do it and it's really serious, that's when he gets a spanking. But I try to, that's the last escalation that I
Here's the thing.
So
when our kids were young, that book came out. It was called 1, 2, 3 Magic, that kind of promoted that.
That's a really popular book still.
And I read it, but I'll have to tell you, I was a fan of first time obedience, just because I feel like if you I don't like to argue.
Yeah.
So if you waste your breath to tell them, then you don't do it. And what worked for me, this is going to sound awful, but especially when your kids get older, and the boys are playing video games and it's dinner time and you call once, but they're so engrossed, they don't, and you call twice. That just didn't work for me. You can 1, 2, 3 magic that all day that long, and they're just going to keep playing at that age. I just did ignore them. You missed dinner.
Yeah.
And tomorrow when you come home from school, your video game's going to be gone. It literally disappears. Like I would, truthfully, often I would lock things in the trunk of my car because they couldn't go there. But,
Nice.
I would just make it disappear. I'm not going to argue
tell
about
them
it.
5 minutes in advance, you got 5 minutes left. And then when you call for dinner, then, so it's not such an abrupt, this is funny. I feel like every part of the conversation, I'm like, I just wrote an article about this. I have an article, but we do. The reason why the counting to 3 method doesn't work, or why it might not be the best method, if it does work, because I use it on my kids sometimes, 1, 2, 2.5, like everybody gets to the fraction point. But these reasons, it teaches your kids to ignore you because they don't have to jump at 1.
They know they have to 3.
So it teaches them the habit of ignoring you. It says you're willing to negotiate because you think that as you count to 3, you think that every step toward 3 is a step closer to obedience. Meanwhile, your child is hearing, I have a chance to negotiate. I have 3 counts to convince her that I'm not going to get up off the floor. It intensifies the situation. If you think about any time you count, it's like you count down to New Year's or you count up to whatever. I mean, that's like just building the tension, and it sets a stage for a blow up because Megan, if you hadn't had a plan for when you got to 3, well, then what? Now here we are at 3.
I still have to discipline.
And I still have to do something. And I probably don't have a plan. So instead, I'm just going to yell. I mean, that's what I would do, at least.
Yeah.
So that's why it's just not the best.
I had to resort to a lot. For me, 1, 2, 3 with 5 kids, I'd be 1, 2, 3 all day. I mean, there's just no, I'd be counting all day.
Multiples of 3.
Yeah, exactly. I just didn't ever want to argue too. I remember driving kids to a party and they were bickering in the back of the van, and I was like, "Hey, you are not in no condition to go to a party right now. The way you're talking to each other," and they didn't listen. And I pulled the car over, and I just sat there. And Mom, we're going to be late. We're going to be late. I'm contemplating you not going at all because you cannot even be civil to each other. So how can you be around people? And I said, you have a choice now. You guys can make amends, and I'm going to watch how you handle this, or we're going home.
Wow.
I made my kids hold hands the other night while they put laundry in the wash.
Oh, no.
You should have seen them carrying a laundry basket. I mean, they were like dying laughing after like 30 seconds. But I said, nope, the whole way. And I said, even to start it, even to put everything in, I said, the whole way. Yeah. And the little one started to do it without his brother. I said, come back. He's helping you. Hold hands. I think I'm in the easiest phase right now, having an 8 and a 10-year-old. They still care. Like toddler is hard and then teen is hard. I'm definitely in the sweet easy discipline spot. Lord, I hope you just heard me. I acknowledged it. I'm humble.
Keep it going.
Yeah, right. So you just mentioned creative consequences, Megan, and I think that that's the key. When you have a kid who doesn't care about consequences, it's really about tapping into the more creative ones that make sense, that are either natural consequences or that are an actual consequence of the action, and that they're related to the thing that the child did wrong. You know, if you showed up for work 30 minutes late and your boss said, well, your coffee privileges have been revoked, you'd be like, well, what does that have to do with me being late? You know? And so it doesn't make sense in our head. Why would we take our kids' phone away when they break curfew? I mean, that's probably not the best example, because maybe that is a decent one.
And for somebody like Chloe's brother, a creative consequence keeps them guessing. So a lot of kids, if they don't care about the consequences you gave them last time, they're going to play, Russian roulette and say, well, I can take that, so I'm going to do it again. It's just not worth it to them not to.
Yeah.
But if it's always changing, it's always like, I'm going to think about this twice.
Yeah. We have a great article, The 21 Creative Consequences, that has some... Honestly, there's a couple on there that people are like, you can't do that.
And we don't know. Somebody else wrote it, but we don't.
Right. But I think that depending on the child, like we said at the beginning, you might need to resort to make them hold, if they can't keep their room clean and they have a dozen books under the bed, make them hold the books above their head for 10 minutes. You know, like people are like, well, that's torture. You're hurting your child. You're not going to hurt your kid.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's use your mom brain and do what's best for your child. But these creative things that will actually stick with them.
Yeah. I did a really, Megan, should I tell the orange soda one? That was really bad.
No, you're going to be reported.
Oh, you had to drink it. Then you had to drink a whole 2 liter?
It
was worse than that. It was worse than that.
But what I was going to say is, too, if you're a new mom like me and it's your first kid, try... If you're the friend or a parent, try not to judge another parent by how they're disciplining. And if you think unless you think it's like seriously like abusive, but also too, if you're a new mom like me and you have a very strong-willed child, you know, you have to do what's best for your child. And it might not be what you thought it was going to be, but you know, it's to keep them safe. And
have y'all ever seen Parenthood? You know, the scene when they're in the at the school play and their son starts knocking everything down, and some of the parents are getting really angry, like, that child's ruining everything, and some of them are laughing. Be the parent who laughs, because every parent has a child who disobeys or acts out at some point, and to look at them like they're a terrible parent is so wrong, because it makes parents afraid to go anywhere and parent their kids for fear of, you know, censure.
And I think that, you know, that you kind of really just touched on the big picture. It's that this moment will pass, and there's so many things that we have to pay attention to, because you're training your child and you're being consistent, but at the same time, you really have to zoom out and just look at the big picture. And sometimes you have to laugh. Sometimes you have to say, is this worth the fight, or can I step back and take a deep breath and then figure out where to go from here?
And everyone needs to remember that kids are a work in progress. And as a part of that, sometimes the progress is going to look messy. And give the parent a chance.
Well, and I think, and parents are a work in progress. I mean, if it's your first kid, you've never had kids before. Sure. And even if it's just your second kid, it can be completely different from your first kid. Like, maybe my next kid will be much more compliant.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
All right. Have you noticed a certain type of discipline technique works on one of your kids and not the other? Tell us via the link in the show notes. And that's also where you're going to find links to everything we talked about today. I feel like we hit a lot of articles and printables today. So definitely check out those links. And we also have links to our socials there. And we know you have a lot going on, so be sure to hit the subscribe button so that these episodes come to your podcast feed automatically. See, we're saving you time and giving you one less thing to do. And if you enjoy listening, rate us on iTunes so other moms can find us too. Thanks for listening to the iMom podcast. iMom is the motherhood program of the nonprofit organization Family First. Along with our fatherhood program, All Pro Dad, we exist to help you love your family well. Subscribe to our daily email, the iMom Minute, by going to imom.com/subscribe and get tons of great ideas, insight, and inspiration. The I'm On podcast is hosted by me, Abby Watts, along with Susan Merrill, Megan Tigner, and Chloe Blumenthal. Edited by Isaiah Gunther.